Mike Ricketts of Planes Mistaken for Stars. What's happening, man? Thanks for catching up. I've been wanting to talk to you for quite some time.
Yeah, man, I'm glad you got a hold of me. Yeah, man, it's been, a hell of a ride, and it's been a while since we played some music, but we're stoked for this new record, and I'm just happy that you got a hold of us to help promote it.
Absolutely. Yeah, man. I mean, speaking of which, the new record, Do You Still Love Me, I believe out November 1st, if I'm correct
Yeah.
on that date.
Yep, November 1st.
Nice, man. I'd love to hear
Actually, our
some.
our
Oh, no,
single, our second single is just dropping today, I believe. So,
yeah, I just got an email for it. It's called Arrow, right?
correct. Yeah.
Yes. Which sounds great. The two tracks that I've heard thus far all sound really, really awesome. It's been kind of heartbreaking reading some of the lyrics at times, you know.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
but speaking of which, I guess to kind of delve into the process of writing it and recording basic tracks, and then when Garrett sort of enters the picture during was a time I guess you could say he was conscious. There was a conscious effort on his behalf to push through said process despite having
def-
a cancer diagnosis. So. Uh,
Definitely.
I guess when did y'all start writing the music for this? Was Garrett involved with it then? And then we can get into the actual recording of it and then what he did, his process.
Yeah, so it's a long story. I think we had always intended to write this record. I mean, when Prey came out in 2016, um, we'd played sporadic shows. We would do like little mini tours here and there, play, Gainesville Fest and other one-offs. And during that time, we were still Garrett never stopped writing music, so we would take that time for like sound checks and shit to like go through some jams. And we had like this back, like how about 3 or 4 songs that we really wanted to push out and get ready for the next record. So kind of leading up to like 2019, we already had a couple things in the works, and we really were like, all right, it's time to push out this next record. And we were all stoked to work on it. It's going to be, great effort. We were all kind of scattered in different cities, so we were trying to make that work. And part of that process, Neil Keener, our bass player, actually went to go visit Garrett and stay with him for like a couple weeks at Garrett's house in Peoria. And this was like in early 2020. Um, and so they was going to hash out a couple more songs, try to get some writing done so we could try to get into the studio later that year. Well, then the pandemic hit. And so Neil was actually stuck at Garrett's house that entire time for what turned out to be 5 years when all was said and done. He ended up just staying there. And through that process, him and Garrett just like worked through a shit ton of material. Um, Neil was one of those people who's like really a prolific writer, but also like a slave driver with Garrett because he recognized that anything Garrett put on tape could turn into gold if we worked it right, right?
Right.
So they wrote a shit ton of demos. That's kind of where of varying styles, not just Plains material, but they also put out the Blunt Razors record, which is more mellow stuff. Um, and so through the creation of those demos, they would send them to Chuck and and then I would go down there to Peoria and lay drums down over some of those demos. And so it was kind of a different way of recording or of writing songs because number one, I had to play to a click track, which I had done on occasion. Like I played along to like electronic beats and shit in my other bands. So I had some familiarity with it, but I'd never done it like in the style of like writing, like, trying to write a song over a click track, is pretty new.
Hmm.
Um, so that's kind of how we came up with the basics of those songs for this record. And then throughout that process, right after those demos kind of got done, is when Garrett found out about his diagnosis. And we'd already had studio time booked with Sanford Parker in Chicago. And so we took all those recordings and demos that we already had, brought them to Sanford, and worked with him to kind of, get kind of the pro level drum sounds. We redid all that stuff. We got Garrett's vocals and guitars done as soon as possible because he was about to go into radiation treatment. We were unsure like kind of what the radiation would do to his voice.
Absolutely.
because it was esophageal cancer, so he was getting like beamed like right, right in his vocal cords.
Yeah.
So we wanted to get that out of the way first, and then after that, it was just um, you know, getting the mixing down and dealing with uh, you know, Garrett getting sicker and sicker month by month, and then eventually passing away in November of 21. So,
Wow.
um, yeah, so that was kind of the process leading up to the record. I think it's interesting too. A lot of the lyrics that Garrett wrote during that time were actually written before he had the diagnosis, which is interesting because if you read the lyrics for this record, there's a lot of reflection on like life and death and like
Yes.
um, and so it's almost like what's the word I'm looking for? Like he knew ahead of time. like,
Prophetic.
yeah, exactly, prophetic. Um, so yeah, it was definitely a crazy time for all of us. And obviously his death um, set us back in some ways, but also really put a drive in us to make sure that we didn't like lose the record, right? We didn't want to like drop it, but just because he was gone, it was like this extra urge that like we have to fucking get this thing out now.
Yeah.
And we have to do it well, and we have to like honor like what we thought his vision of it was. So that was kind of our primary goal from that point on, was to just make sure we got it done right. We were maybe a little uh too analytical about it, and we were a little too picky on like, we need to make sure this sounds great. We need to make sure the packaging's perfect, and that kind of led to some of the delays in getting it out. But it's coming out now, so we're fucking
Yeah.
stoked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
Oh yeah.
mentioned the producer that y'all worked with on this. His name Spencer. What was his name?
Sanford.
Sanford.
Yeah,
You
Sanford
mentioned
Parker.
redoing it. Did you mean you retracked your drums from the demos or?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So the demos that we did at Garrett's house was, just like lo-fi recording. Like Neil had like his little setup there, and it was kind of just to to work through ideas, right? To like,
Hmm.
so I could figure out what the fuck I wanted to play over this stuff, and kind of work out the fills and like what I wanted to do. And then once we got into a real studio, I had a better idea of like, okay, I know what I want to play.
Gotcha. I mean, was it tough retracking that stuff? Was there pressure of going in the studio and having a sense of, all right, this is real, or did you feel comfortable enough with the original demos that you had done that you were just pretty much playing along with that and had a better sense of where the music was going at that time?
Yeah, I mean, I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted to do by that stage. There's always shit like, I know we called it demoitis, where it's like you get so familiar with like what you're hearing in the demo, and when you can't do the exact same thing a second time, it bugs the shit out of you.
Right.
But I think for the most part, I stayed true to kind of what I wanted to do. And we even kind of worked with some of the songs a little bit more too, and added sections here and there in the studio to make them more interesting. So it was definitely a work in progress once we got up to Chicago to do the recordings.
Mm,
Um, but for the most part, I knew what I wanted when I went into the studio. So
excellent. With you mentioned Peoria, I'm assuming that's Illinois. Is that just outside of Chicago?
yeah, Peoria, Illinois. It's central Illinois. It's kind of where we all grew up, at least like Garrett, myself, and like Matt Bellinger, our former guitar player, and Jamie Dreyer, who was our former bass player, and Aaron Wise were all from that area. So the
Okay.
band started in Peoria around like 1997. So yeah, and
At,
Garrett was back there in like late 2000s.
gotcha. At which point did y'all become a Denver band, quote unquote, or was it just some of you, or did the entire band move to Denver?
Yeah, that was our great exodus. We were all in, we had just gotten done with our first like main tour, and we were all living in a fucking like a commune house up on a hill in East Peoria, and we were like, we need to get the fuck out of this town. And we had some friends in Denver we'd met on tour, and we decided to just get like a 26-foot moving truck, and we loaded all of our shit from that house into the truck, moved out to Denver, and that was in 1999. And
Wow.
then from that, in Denver had such a great welcoming music scene, and I think it was really great for us because they were so welcoming and excited for us to be there. But um, And I think we kind of instilled some like also some enthusiasm into their scene as well. So it was like this
Mhm.
mutual like love, that we
Yeah.
got in Denver, and we lived there for like over a decade. So and some of our guys are still there.
Wow. You mentioned that happening around 99. I believe the self-titled EP or LP, whatever you want to call it. I mean, it's got like what, 8 songs? It's around 30 minutes. I feel call that an LP. Like, Slayer put out records in that area and they call them LPs. So fuck it. Y'all put out an LP. I don't care if they call it
Yeah,
LP.
totally. It's our first record. Let's just call it that.
Absolutely. Who are y'all touring with? And it sounds like you kind of found yourselves in a cool and welcoming scene in Denver, which is really cool, like you mentioned. But I feel like I saw y'all possibly in the late 90s, early 2000s, maybe with Dillinger Escape Plan coming through New Orleans. Am I
Oh
right
yeah,
about that?
yeah. We did a little tour with them, maybe a couple actually. Um,
I think I
yeah,
might have seen y'all once or twice with them.
it was weird. That was a weird time period, man, because I mean, Plains has always kind of been like hard to define,
Yeah.
but yeah, we were touring with Cross My Heart and like all these like more like space rocky bands. But then we'd also like play hardcore shows and like house and metal shows. So yeah, we did tour with Dillinger Escape Plan at the time, and yeah, it was a great time. I think that record did come out around 99, and that was again on the like quintessential emo label Deep Elm,
Hmm.
um, which is what emo hardcore like that whole time period was such a shit show of like stuff getting mixed up and people like trying to make stuff heavy but also like emotional like I don't even
Yeah,
know.
totally.
So
Yeah,
and I
man.
don't we didn't try to consciously fit into any of that, but we were just kind of all we wanted to do was fucking follow in like Black Flag's footsteps and get in a van and tour the country.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting in that coming out in 99 because I mean, bands like Botch, Dillinger, Coalesce, some of those heavier
Yeah.
bands were putting out records that year. And like you said, you kind of have you guys, which kind of fit within your own kind of strange little stratosphere. But here y'all are playing with a band like Dillinger. Was it wild seeing Dillinger at the time, like on a nightly basis and touring with those guys?
Fuck yeah, dude. Like, dude, I mean, the drummer for Dillinger is sick, man.
Chris
Like,
Penny. Yeah,
yeah,
he's one of the
it's
baddest.
it was amazing, like being able to play shows with bands that like I had been listening to like for years, and like or some of these bands like I had just discovered, and been like, holy fuck, these guys are fucking rad, and like, yeah, I'd get so excited just to be backstage watching these drummers like fucking kill it. I mean, Ben Kohler from Converge too. When we played shows with
Oof.
those guys, like
So
every night,
crazy.
fascinated by the technical and like the power that those dudes can put out.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah, so that was really exciting to be able to play shows with bands that we really respected. Eventually, we got to meet the Hot Water Music guys, and that was the same situation. Like I'd been listening, Feel for the Hate Game was one of my favorite records in like whatever 95 or 96, whenever that was out.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, that's just kind of part of the journey of like when you tour that much and you gain a little bit of exposure and you start to meet people, those kind of things just start to evolve. You find yourself playing shows with random bands that you've been idolizing for the past like 5 to 10 years of your life, and it's
Yeah.
just great things. So definitely,
Yeah, man. When in those late 90s and early 2000s, sort of the whole van touring life, nomadic rock and roll lifestyle can lend itself to playing some pretty bizarre shows, bad shows, great shows, everything in between. Are there any especially memorable shows from the late 90s, early 2000s? And that could be
there's
for any myriad of reasons.
there are so many. I don't know. I mean, one that pops to mind. Well, I'm gonna tell you about two that pop to mind. The first one is, God, I think it was Birmingham, Alabama. They're gonna kill me if I'm wrong on
Oh
that, but
boy.
there was a show this was probably like this was winter, and we show up to the show. It's under this bridge,
Was it at the
and
Nick? The
there's
Nick
barrel
in Birmingham?
fires. Yeah, it may have been.
The Nick was one of the only clubs in that area that was around that time that would even entertain rock and roll shows. I feel
I
like
don't
so
know
it
if it
might have
was a
been there.
club though. It seemed more
Oh,
like a house show, like a warehouse show.
oh,
That
damn. Okay,
show took place literally under this bridge outside with like 3 or 4 barrel fires going, and it
okay,
was like
that maybe
fucking
not.
like it was in like the fucking 20s, and like so it was freezing and cold, but like there was a hardcore show and we fucking played it and it was fantastic. It was so much fun.
Damn.
That was one. And then there was this place called the Milk Factory in Chicago that some of our buddies used to live at, and it's literally an old milk factory from like back in the day, like 100 years old, converted into a living space. Um, but that was fucking nuts as well. That was just, it was so hot. It was like the exact opposite. It was super fucking hot, humid as shit. Um, to the point we were all just fucking got naked and like there was a sweat and spit and fucking blood like everywhere over all the floor. People were slipping around and like it was just crazy. Um, and that's just a few examples, man. There were so many house shows. Usually, though, I feel like those awesome shows were house shows,
Right.
almost always, because that's kind of the only type of place where you can get away with some of the crazy shit that makes a show really memorable. You know?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, man.
Anyway, yeah, that's a
That's
couple examples, but
Yeah, man. And it's funny, and again, kind of reverting back to sort of the how hard it is to sort of define the band. In the early 2000s, you did have bands like, At the Drive-In, or maybe some of the stuff that was coming out in New York, where there was the Rapture or Liars or like Yeah Yeah Yeahs, or some of those
yeah,
kind of angular, semi-dancey kind of, also not hardcore, but sort of angular kind of post-punk thing
yeah,
that
like
I
kind of
felt like
indie.
y'all maybe had kind of fit maybe into that a little bit too. I don't know.
Yeah, so I mean that whole like kind of indie like mathy like influence, right? Like I
Hmm.
think it's like Don Caballero and like
Sure.
so when I come from a kind of a as a member of the band, I was probably the most like technically like aware, and so
Uh-huh.
I would push things like odd signatures when I could, or like weird parts where I thought might make the song more interesting, because I have come from like a real like technical musical background, and like you know the guys would just like go along with it and just kind of play over it, um, and then Matt Bellinger was an amazing guitar player who he would naturally kind of write shit that was like in odd time signatures just because it felt right for him, even though he didn't know it was in an odd time signature. And
Hmm.
so I would have to take it and try to work it out, like what the fuck is this in, and like try to figure out how I could make my beat like fit to it or make it like make sense. And yeah, so we definitely did play around with a lot of that type of those sounds as well. I don't know if it was conscious or not. It was just kind of more of like the writing process. You get in a room with a couple guys and everyone has an idea of what they want it to be, and then it shapes into something completely different.
Hmm. You mentioned Matt Bellinger, the guitarist. Your band has the craziest dubious distinction of having not one but two guys past that have played in the band. I don't
Yeah.
fully know the story behind Matt. Was he had left the band, was in other bands, and then got into some shit? And what the hell happened there?
Yeah. So Matt's story. So I want to make clear too that Matt and Garrett were like probably like the real founders of the band, right? Like
Hmm.
those guys have been playing music together since they were kids.
Wow.
They were in another band before in high school called Dismiss. They had been playing music for a long time together, and so there's this weird irony that like those are the two guys that passed, right? And like we're kind of the remaining members are kind of yeah, I grew up with those guys, but I didn't meet them until like college and
Right.
whatever. Um, but yeah, Matt's story. Matt was in the band. He and Gared and I were the founding members of it with our friend Aaron Wise, who played on the first record. And then Jamie Dreyer joined the band for most of the touring and stuff in those early years. And then we got to this place where you know Matt wanted to kind of pursue other projects. He was really getting into like Neil Young and like started this project with his wife at the time, Marie, called Ghost Buffalo, which was kind of more like Americana
Uh-huh.
influenced stuff and really good. Actually, I played drums on the first record of that as well.
Okay.
Um, and because of that, he kind of wanted to focus on that and not tour as much with Planes. And so at the same time, Planes was getting opportunities to do these really good shows, high paying, good playing with good bands. And Matt, essentially put his foot down and was like, I want to pursue this other thing.
Hmm.
So we're like, that's cool. We'll just get another guitar player, for the meantime. that didn't go over well with Matt, and there were some fallouts, and so he ended up leaving the band. And I think we always kind of were hoping that we would all kind of come back together at some point, maybe even as a five piece. And he had always been really uh, interested in like mind alteration and drugs, let's just say, to put it bluntly.
Yeah.
But he was really smart, man, and he like I always thought he would make a great like pharmacist, because he knew like all the ways that like chemicals influence different receptors in the brain and shit, and he was really interested in kind of exploring that whole world of shit. And eventually it just got the better of him, man. Like he got addicted to shit that addiction is a fucking hell of a thing. And eventually he struggled with it for well over a decade.
Wow.
I think he knew he was going down a bad path. And in those last couple of years, like many people didn't even know where he was. They knew he was in Denver somewhere, but even his best friends were like, we don't know where he's at. We think we saw him under a bridge somewhere.
Oh,
So we would go on, we'd get together in a van and like literally drive around town looking for him to see if we could find him. Um, and then eventually, yeah, man, he passed away from it. And, so it was a very sad story. He's someone like that who you spent well over like, 15 to 20 years of your life with, and to see them go down that path and then, eventually you hear of their death, and it's not necessarily a surprise, but it's like an emotional shock,
totally.
yeah, yeah, it's weird if that makes sense. It's not surprising, but it's like shocking, you know, I
Right.
don't
You
know.
never know the timeline necessarily, though you
Yeah.
assume that that is a reality, but it's still when it does happen, you're like, oh, fuck. Yeah, it doesn't, still
Yeah, and I
terrible
think we've all lost friends. Many of us have lost friends like that,
for
and it's
sure.
never fucking easy to deal with. And like I'm still dealing with it. Like I still question, like, did we do everything we could have? Was I sad enough at the time? Like when I found out, like I'm still processing the whole thing, and I go through periods of time where I really need to reflect on it and give it some heartfelt consideration.
Right. I hear you, man. Was that, I'm not certain when he passed, but I know between Mercy, and I do want to talk to you about Mercy because I really like that record. I think Mercy was the one y'all worked on with Matt Bayles, correct?
Correct. Yeah. Hmm.
Awesome. There was that break of 10 years between Mercy and Prey. Were y'all all still in Denver during that decade as well?
That was our kind of transitionary decade. We did a couple. So after Mercy, we kind of went our separate ways. Garrett moved back to Illinois to be closer to his kids. He went through a divorce. I wanted to move back to Chicago or Illinois as well, to be closer to my mom. The other guys wanted to stay in Denver. And we essentially, I brought to the surface like, um, I wanted to slow down to pursue other things. I wanted to pursue a science career, right? And which
Hmm.
I did. And then with the envision from my point was to slow down, but still play shows every once in a while, still write music, and still be a band.
Hmm.
At the time, Garrett wasn't having it. He was like, "No, fuck that. We were either going to go full force or we are going to quit." So we made an announcement that we were done. We did a couple of final tours, planned that out. Did a final show in Denver, I think in 2008, nine, maybe I can't remember.
Hmm.
And then kind of went our separate ways for a while, and that was after Mercy.
Gotcha.
Uh, Garrett did some stuff called Hawks and Doves, some solo shit. I went back to grad school, did some things, and then over time, we were still hanging out with each other, still best friends, and we were like, why the fuck aren't we still playing music and writing? Like we always wanted to, and just because we said we were done doesn't mean we have to stay done.
Hmm.
So that's when we started working on Prey, and Prey came out in 2016. I'm really proud of that record too. Um, I feel like it was kind of our like reunion record and kind of reinvigorated life back into the band and gave us a kind of a more like long-term trajectory for the bands, like
Hmm.
we don't necessarily have to play every fucking show that we get offered. We can like do like one-off shows here and there. We can like do like 2-week tours instead of like busting our ass 6 months out of the year.
Yeah.
um and still make the band work. And that was kind of what my long-term goal had always been. So I feel like Prey kind of offered us like a solution to that, like got us where we always wanted to be. And then yeah, this next record, obviously, like with Garrett's passing, all that stopped. Fuck.
Right, right.
Fuck. Yeah.
Oh man. Going back to Mercy again, I really dig that record. I
Sure.
mentioned Matt Bayles earlier, and people who maybe aren't familiar with him, he's worked with everybody from Botch to Macedon to ISIS to Pearl Jam.
Yes.
He's worked on so many records. How was it working with him? If you kind of revert back to that time of that working on that record with him.
Fucking great. Like that was such an amazing experience. Uh, so yeah, we recorded the drum tracks in like, Pearl Jam studio,
Wow.
which was fantastic. And then we did a lot of the other tracking and God, I wish I could remember the names. It's all on Discogs, but
Yeah. Mhm.
um, yeah, it was a fantastic experience. We actually had some fairly decent funding to record that record.
Mm.
So we actually rented a house in West Seattle for an entire month, and we had the kind of the skeleton of that record already put together going into it. We hopped in Garrett's fucking like whatever. I think it's like a '72 Bronco with a trailer hooked up to the hitch. Drove up to Seattle, moved into this house, and then just like concentrated on getting this fucking record done and working with Matt Bayles, one of our favorite like engineers at the time was fantastic. He's such a sweet dude. But also knows when to like take control and be like, no, that's a fucking horrible idea. We're gonna do it my way. Like, because we were a band up until that point where like very guitar heavy, where we put like fucking like 6 guitar tracks over a fucking part. Like we would like double up guitars, and like Matt like put his foot down. It was like this is gonna be a fucking rock record. There's gonna be Gared, you get one guitar track. Chuck, you get one guitar track, and Mikey, you get one drum track, and Neil, you get one bass track, and then we'll add anything else we see fits later if we decide it needs it. But
Yeah.
uh, yeah, so it was just a great experience, just because we got to really like kind of stay in Seattle, focus on just the record. We wake up every morning, head into the studio, work on it, um, you know, have lunch, um, go back to our little really cool fucking house in West Seattle and do the same thing the next day. It was a beautiful time, and
That's
I think
awesome.
it reflects that. One of my major regrets is that the label we were on at the time that we had just signed with was in the process of folding. Abacus was the name of the label, and
Right.
so they all of a sudden like there was no distribution. There was distribution. There was just no promotion for the record at
Right.
all.
Yeah.
Like it just like failed. So there was no push for it. It was really hard for us to get shows and good tours. And like we even talked to some friends, and they would be like, "When's your record coming out?" We'd be like, "Dude, it's been out like for 2 months." Like
Uh,
so that was it. Kind of like flopped in that respect, but uh, it is one of my prouder works. Though I like the stuff that we did on that record.
absolutely.